The rain fell in steady sheets over Cedar Falls, Iowa, soaking the streets in a dull silver glow. It was past midnight and the town was asleep, except for one man sitting on the curb outside the closed police station, his hands covering his face, his uniform drenched and clinging to him like a second skin. Officer Daniel Brooks, 32, looked nothing like the respected officer the town had come to know. His strong shoulders trembled as silent sobs escaped him, blending into the rhythm of the rain. No one was around to see his breakdown. No one, except for a stray dog. Out of the shadows, a German shepherd slowly emerged, wet, scruffy, and clearly hungry. Mud clung to its paws, and its ribs were faintly visible through its soaked fur. Between its teeth, the dog held a small piece of bread, old and soggy, but it walked with quiet determination. The animal paused a few feet from the officer, ears perked and eyes fixed on him. Not with fear or aggression, but with something softer, understanding. Daniel didn't notice the dog at first. It was the gentle nudge against his arm that made him look up. His red-rimmed eyes met those of the dog, who carefully set the piece of bread down at his feet. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The absurdity and the beauty of the gesture hit Daniel like a wave. This stray, this forgotten creature was offering him the only thing it had. And somehow it was enough to make his heart break all over again. He let out a shaky laugh, part disbelief, part gratitude, and reached out with a trembling hand. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped closer and rested its head gently against Daniel's chest. The warmth of the animal's body in the cold rain. It was more comfort than he'd felt in days. Without thinking, he broke the bread in half and gave one piece back to the dog, who accepted it gratefully. They ate in silence, side by side, strangers bonded by pain and bread. Then, just as suddenly, the dog stood up. His ears twitched, and he turned toward the empty road, letting out a soft whine. An alert, not of danger, but of urgency. He looked back at Daniel, eyes clear and focused, almost as if saying, "Follow me." Daniel hesitated, then rose slowly, pulled by something deeper than logic. He didn't know it yet, but following that dog would lead him down a path that would uncover a truth buried deep in his past, and move an entire town to tears. The rain eased into a soft drizzle as Daniel followed the stray dog down the quiet street. The town of Cedar Falls slept under a gray sky, unaware that something unexpected was unfolding just a few blocks away from its heart. Daniel kept a cautious pace, still uncertain why he was even walking after the dog. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was because, for the first time in weeks, someone had given him a reason to stand up. The dog moved with quiet purpose, glancing back occasionally to make sure Daniel was still behind. He didn't limp, but his gait carried the weariness of an animal that had seen too much. Daniel, trained to read body language in both humans and animals, noticed it immediately. This dog wasn't just wandering. He was leading. But where? And why? They stopped near an old, abandoned firehouse at the edge of town. The place had been boarded up for years, a relic from a time when Cedar Falls had more fires and fewer firemen. The dog scratched once at the door, then circled around the side, where a broken window pane hung loosely. He leapt through the gap with practiced ease. Daniel hesitated, glancing around. Something about this place felt familiar, not physically, emotionally. Stepping inside, Daniel was hit by the thick smell of mold and wood rot. The building creaked under his boots as he walked, flashlight from his belt cutting through the darkness. He found the dog curled in a corner beside an old pile of tattered blankets and a rusted food bowl. This was his home, and beside that bowl, Daniel saw it clearly now, was something that froze him in place. A worn leather collar with a faded police tag. Cedar Falls PD, badge number 1823. His heart pounded. That number, he knew it. It was the badge number of David Brooks, his father. The man Daniel had tried so hard to stop becoming. The same man whose death, 10 years ago, still echoed through every corner of his life. Slowly, he crouched and picked up the tag. Shadow, the dog, watched him without blinking. There was no fear, only recognition. Daniel sat down heavily, the collar in his hand, the dog by his side, and 1,000 questions storming his mind. Had this dog served with his father? Had he been left behind when everything fell apart? And more importantly, why did he come back now? Whatever the truth was, Daniel could feel it. This dog hadn't just stumbled into his life. He had returned for a reason. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of the abandoned firehouse, his back against the cold brick wall, the faded police tag resting in his open palm. The weight of it was heavier than anything he had felt in years. The dog, Shadow as he now called him, lay nearby, eyes half closed but always alert, like a soldier on silent watch. Rain tapped lightly on the broken window above them, and in that quiet rhythm, Daniel's mind spiraled back to the past he had fought so hard to ignore. His father, Officer David Brooks, had died in what the department officially called a line-of-duty accident, a vague phrase that left too much unsaid. Daniel had only been 22 at the time, just a rookie. After the funeral, no one ever spoke much about David again. Not his mother, not his fellow officers, especially not Sheriff Whitaker, who had been David's partner. That silence had haunted Daniel more than the loss itself. And now, holding this old tag, it no longer felt like silence. It felt like a cover-up. He turned the tag over. The back was scratched and worn, but beneath the dirt, Daniel could just barely make out something strange. A series of numbers etched by hand. Not part of the badge ID, something added later. 14-7-9. It meant nothing to him at first glance, but his gut told him it wasn't random. He pulled out his phone and took a picture, his mind already racing through every possible connection. Shadow stirred, lifting his head and letting out a soft huff. He stood and walked over to Daniel, pressing his nose gently against the officer's knee. There was an unspoken urgency in the way the dog looked at him, like he was saying, "You're not done yet." Daniel let out a slow breath and nodded. He had the next step. He just didn't know where it led. By morning, Daniel drove back into town with Shadow riding quietly in the back seat of his patrol car. He didn't take him to animal control. He didn't ask for permission. The dog was coming with him, and the first stop wasn't the station. It was someone who might actually tell the truth. His mother, Martha. She had always avoided details about David's final days, but now, Daniel wasn't asking. He was demanding answers. As he parked in front of her house, Shadow jumped out first and trotted toward the front porch, as if he'd been there before. Daniel stood frozen on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure of what would hurt more, hearing the truth or realizing she had kept it from him all along. Martha Brooks stood in the doorway in her housecoat, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes immediately locked on the dog beside Daniel. For a second, her expression softened, nostalgic, even, but it quickly shifted to something else. Unease. Daniel noticed. Shadow did too. The dog didn't bark or move. He simply sat on the porch like he'd done it 100 times before. "You brought him back," Martha said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel stepped forward. "You know this dog?" he asked, holding out the old collar and badge tag in his hand. Her eyes flicked to it and then away. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the door and gestured for them to come inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Everything was in its place just like it always had been. But Daniel felt like a stranger here now. Shadow laid down on the rug in the living room like he belonged there. Maybe he had. Daniel sat across from his mother, the collar still in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" he asked. "About Shadow, about Dad's connection to him." Martha exhaled slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "Because your father didn't want you caught up in that part of his life. The part that didn't fit neatly into a uniform and a badge." Her voice wavered. "Shadow wasn't just a police dog. He was your father's partner. And he was the only one who came back the night David died." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What do you mean, came back?" "He showed up at our doorstep 2 days after the funeral. Muddy, bleeding, shaking like he'd run through hell. I thought he had escaped from the scene, but Sheriff Whitaker came by and told me to forget he ever existed. Said it was better for everyone if Shadow disappeared. That name again. Sheriff Tom Whitaker. The man who'd mentored Daniel, who'd been his father's closest friend. Now he was showing up in every dark corner of this mystery. Daniel looked down at Shadow, whose eyes were wide open, watching Martha. "What happened that night, Mom? What aren't you telling me?" Martha's eyes welled up. She reached out and touched Daniel's hand, voice trembling. "There's a file in the attic. Your father left it with a note. He told me never to read it. Said it would be your decision when the time came." Daniel stood without a word and walked toward the attic stairs. He had no idea what he was about to find, but something inside him whispered. Nothing in his life had ever been what it seemed. The attic smelled like old wood and time. Dust hung in the air, catching the weak sunlight that crept through a narrow window. Daniel climbed the creaking stairs slowly, Shadow close behind him. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the truth itself was pressing down on his shoulders. At the top, he found an old cedar chest, the kind his mother had once used to store winter blankets. But now it held something else. He knelt and opened the lid. Inside, tucked between yellowing newspapers and a faded photo album, was a manila folder marked only with 2 initials. DB, his father's. With trembling hands, Daniel pulled it out and opened it. The first page wasn't a report. It was a handwritten letter, addressed to him. "If you're reading this, Danny, it means I'm already gone, and it means Shadow came back to you. I prayed he would." Daniel swallowed hard and kept reading. The letter was filled with emotion, but also warnings. His father wrote about a case he had taken on secretly, off the record, something involving corruption inside the Cedar Falls Police Department. He didn't name names, but he mentioned a pattern of disappearances, files that were altered, and money that moved in the dark, far from public view. Shadow had been with him during all of it. "He saw things no dog should ever see," the letter said. At the bottom of the folder were photocopies, photos of documents, handwritten notes, even a blurry image of a large black SUV parked near the old firehouse. Daniel remembered seeing that same vehicle in town when he was a teenager, but back then it meant nothing. Now it felt like a ghost. More shocking than anything, though, was the last item, a report with the badge number 1823 listed as present at a scene, dated 2 days after David's reported death. Daniel froze. His father had been declared dead after an accident on the job. Everyone had accepted it. But this document said otherwise. Had he survived? Even briefly? And if so, why hadn't anyone told him? Behind him, Shadow let out a low growl. Not threatening, alerting. Daniel turned toward the attic stairs and heard it. A creak. Someone was inside the house. And just like that, the past wasn't just something Daniel was chasing. It was now chasing him back. Daniel descended the attic stairs slowly, each step calculated and quiet. He kept one hand on the railing, the other holding the folder tightly against his chest. Shadow stayed close, eyes locked on the hallway ahead, his body tense. The creaking sound had come from the front of the house, near the living room. Martha wasn't downstairs. She had gone out to the garden minutes before Daniel had gone up. Whoever was inside wasn't invited. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, Daniel caught a glimpse of a silhouette through the frosted glass of the front door. Broad shoulders, still posture. Not a neighbor, not a stranger. Someone waiting, watching. Shadow growled low again, ears back. The door handle moved slightly, just enough to signal intent. Daniel stepped to the side of the doorway, out of view, and waited. But no one entered. After a long, tense pause, the figure retreated. He rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain just in time to catch the tail end of a black SUV turning down the road. The same kind of vehicle he'd seen in that photo from the file. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was confirmation. Someone knew he had opened the folder. Someone didn't want him reading what came next. Later that evening, Daniel sat with his mother at the kitchen table. He laid the letter and documents out in front of her. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, stopping on the photo of the SUV. "That car used to sit outside the station late at night," she whispered. David told me it wasn't a patrol car, but he never said more than that. Daniel leaned in. Mom, this goes deeper than I thought. If Dad was working off the record, if he was exposing people inside the department, then someone might have made sure he never finished the job. And now they think I might. Martha's eyes filled with tears. They're watching you, Daniel. I know, he said quietly, but I'm not backing off. Shadow, still resting near the back door, suddenly stood and barked once. Short and sharp. Daniel turned, and his heart stopped. Pinned to the doorframe was a small envelope, slipped through the gap under the door. No postage, no name, just one word written on the front in bold black ink. Stop. Daniel picked it up, and as he opened it, he knew. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret anymore. It was about surviving it. Daniel unfolded the envelope with steady hands, but inside, his pulse raced. The paper was plain, folded once, no handwriting. Just a printed message, sharp and cold. Walk away, or you'll join your father. There was no signature, no logo, just that one line. A threat clear enough to stop most people in their tracks. But Daniel wasn't most people. Not anymore. Not after reading his father's letter. And certainly not after watching Shadow react to the SUV like it was something he'd already faced before. Whoever sent that message didn't understand what they had just awakened. He burned the note in the kitchen sink, watching it curl into ash. His mother stood silently behind him, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel, she whispered, maybe it's time to let this go. They're dangerous, and you don't know who they really are. He turned to face her, his voice low and certain. That's exactly why I have to keep going. Daniel called in sick the next morning. Instead of reporting to the station, he drove out to a remote part of Cedar Falls where an old contact of his father used to live, Henry Red Malloy, a retired cop with a sharp memory and a long history of mistrusting authority. Red had been off the radar for years, but his address was still in the back of Daniel's mind. From a childhood visit he barely remembered. If anyone could make sense of the documents, Red could. The small farmhouse stood alone near the edge of a cornfield, weather-beaten and quiet. As Daniel stepped out of the car, Shadow jumped down beside him, ears alert. Before he could knock, the door opened. Red stood there, older than Daniel remembered, but with the same piercing eyes. He took one look at Shadow and froze. Son of a gun, Red muttered. That dog's still alive? Daniel nodded. And he led me to everything my dad was hiding. Red stepped aside. Then you better come in. You've just stepped into something a hell of a lot bigger than you think. As Daniel crossed the threshold, he felt the weight of the past pressing harder than ever. But now, for the first time, he wasn't chasing ghosts alone. He was walking straight into the truth. And whatever Red had to tell him next was going to change everything. The inside of Red Malloy's house was like a time capsule from the late 80s. Plaid furniture, yellowed curtains, and walls lined with dusty photographs of men in uniform. Red poured 2 cups of black coffee without asking, then sat across from Daniel at a cluttered kitchen table. Shadow lay at Daniel's feet, eyes following every move. I didn't think I'd ever see that dog again, Red said quietly. Your father and I, we worked a case together. Off the books. Shadow was part of it from the beginning. Daniel leaned forward. The SUV, the files, the letter. Tell me everything. Red took a long sip of coffee before he spoke. Back then, there was a group inside the Cedar Falls PD, just a few guys, but they had reach. They were cleaning dirty money for a private security firm. Surveillance contracts, off-the-record deals, sometimes even asset disappearances. He paused. Your father got close to exposing them. Too close. That night, the one they said he died in, it wasn't an accident. It was a setup. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. You're saying they killed him? I'm saying they tried to. Red reached under the table and pulled out a metal lockbox. Inside were photocopied reports, audio tapes, and photos, evidence that had been buried for over a decade. One photo showed David Brooks standing next to Shadow outside a warehouse, the same one Daniel recognized from the firehouse. Your father survived the initial hit, Red continued. He went into hiding for 48 hours, tried to get this stuff into safe hands. But then he vanished, officially dead. Unofficially, no one ever found his body, just his badge and a staged scene. Daniel sat back, his head spinning. And Shadow? He came back on his own. He was trained to protect David. If David was gone, he'd find the next person he trusted. That was you. Red slid over a final document, a faded piece of paper with 2 signatures. Sheriff Tom Whitaker, and someone Daniel didn't recognize. R. Langford Private Security. Red pointed. This guy runs a firm out of Des Moines. All roads lead back to him. Daniel clenched his jaw. Everything his father had tried to reveal was still out there. Unfinished, buried, and dangerous. But now he had the file, the dog, and a reason. Red looked him dead in the eye. You sure you want to keep digging? Daniel stood, folding the documents into his jacket. His voice was firm. No more running. I'm finishing what he started. The wind howled as Daniel parked his cruiser outside the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Office just after sunset. The building looked the same as it always had, small, brick, modest. But tonight it felt like a fortress. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, silent and still, staring at the door like he knew what waited on the other side. Daniel reached over and placed a hand on the dog's back. You ready? Shadow didn't blink. Inside, the station was nearly empty. Only one deputy sat behind the front desk, eyes glued to a computer screen. Daniel walked past him without a word. He didn't need an appointment. He didn't need permission. He went straight to Sheriff Tom Whitaker's office, opened the door, and stepped in. Whitaker looked up from his paperwork. At 58, he was still imposing, broad-shouldered, calm, and always in control. But the moment his eyes landed on Shadow, his jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Didn't expect to see that dog again, he said flatly. Daniel tossed the file onto the sheriff's desk. You knew what happened to my father. You helped cover it up. Whitaker didn't deny it. He stared at the folder, then at Daniel. Your dad made a mistake. He went after something bigger than him, and he didn't listen when I told him to stop. I tried to protect him, but once Langford got involved, it was out of my hands. Daniel's voice rose. So you let them kill him? No, Whitaker's face hardened. I let them think they did. The words hit like a punch. Daniel took a step forward, his heart pounding. What are you talking about? Whitaker stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and unlocked the bottom drawer. He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to Daniel. I've been holding on to this for years. David told me to give it to you if the truth ever came knocking. Inside was a note in his father's handwriting, and a location written on the back. A storage facility outside Des Moines. He knew they were coming for him, Whitaker said. He staged the scene. Shadow got away. David disappeared. For good. Daniel stared at the paper, his hands trembling. Is he alive? Whitaker looked away. I don't know, but if anyone can find out, it's you. As Daniel turned to leave, Shadow at his side, a storm began to roll in outside. The final truth was waiting, and someone out there wasn't done hiding it. The storage facility outside Des Moines was old and mostly abandoned. Rows of rusted doors stretched into the distance under a gray morning sky. Daniel walked slowly along the concrete path, Shadow at his side, the location from the letter guiding him to Unit 117. His breath was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. Whatever he was about to find, it wasn't just about his father anymore. It was about truth, closure, healing. The lock was old but easy to break. As the metal door screeched open, the air inside was stale and thick with dust. Daniel stepped in cautiously. Boxes lined the walls, all labeled in his father's handwriting. Evidence A, journal logs, Langford payments. It was a personal archive of everything David Brooks had uncovered. It was everything Daniel needed to expose the truth. But in the center of the unit, on top of an old wooden table, was something he never expected to see. A framed photo of him as a child, sitting on his dad's shoulders, Shadow beside them both. Tucked behind the frame was another letter. Danny, If you found this, it means you kept going even when I couldn't. I left the fight to protect you, but I always knew one day you'd come looking. Everything you need is here. Do what I couldn't. Finish it. Dad. Daniel sat down in silence, tears filling his eyes as he ran his fingers over his father's words. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. He felt seen, understood. Shadow sat beside him, resting his head on Daniel's knee. The dog had never stopped searching. He had led Daniel to this moment, and now it all made sense. In the weeks that followed, Daniel turned everything over to federal investigators. The files blew open a quiet scandal that rocked the Cedar Falls Police Department and exposed Langford's operation. Arrests were made, names were cleared, and the memory of David Brooks was no longer wrapped in mystery. It was honored. Daniel didn't return to the force. He didn't need to. He found purpose in something else. Telling his father's story, teaching others to question, to dig, to trust instinct over silence. He started volunteering at a local rescue center, and Shadow, despite his age, became the symbol of loyalty for the entire town. Some nights, Daniel would sit on the porch with Shadow by his side, watching the sky change colors over the cornfields. And though he never found his father again, not in body, he felt him everywhere. Because some bonds don't end with goodbye. They begin with one broken man and a dog offering half a piece of bread.